Welcome, traveler. You've wandered into a stillness older than sleep, older than stories. You're safe here, drifting gently in a place between memory and myth, where the stars are always watching and the sea never rests. Tonight, we set our course across the wine-dark sea. You won't be a hero, not tonight. Not a god, not a monster, not even a legend. You'll simply be one of us, a sailor, one among many, with wind in your hair, salt on your tongue, and a longing in your chest for a home that waits too far away. We'll join Odysseus, not as myth, but as men, tired, hopeful, clever, bound to one ship. For years, we'll see what it was like to live through the great return from Troy, the long, cursed, beautiful voyage of a lifetime. Along the way, we'll visit the strange island of the Lotus Eaters, glimpse the mind of a one-eyed giant, linger in the spell of Circe, and sail past the song of the sirens. And somewhere far off, on a quiet shore, a woman spins wool in the flickering light. Waiting, waiting, always waiting. But tonight, there is no rush. There are no storms here, just stories. Let's begin slowly, as the sails rise. Let's begin with the sea. You were there at the end, not the glorious end they sang about, with chariots thundering through gates or heroes crowned in gold. No, you were there when the fire had already burned low, when the cries of battle had gone quiet, and only the smoke still moved. Troy had fallen. But what they don't tell you in the stories is how it felt to walk through the silence afterward. You stepped carefully over broken stones, through alleys once filled with laughter. You passed a house with half its roof missing. Inside, a chair still stood, facing a wall that no longer existed. There were no bodies now. Those had been carried away, buried, burned. But the scent of ash lingered, deep in the grain of your clothes. The war had ended, but there was no celebration in you, just weariness, like a stone tucked beneath your ribs. You weren't a hero, just one of the men. You had followed Odysseus from Ithaca years ago, before your beard had greyed and your back began to ache after a day of rowing. Now, like him, you longed for home. The word had taken on a kind of myth of its own. Ithaca. It drifted through your dreams, olive groves under golden sun, quiet hills that smelled of thyme and salt, a place that felt too far away to be real anymore. You didn't know it then, but it would be 10 more years before you saw it again. The ships had waited offshore, their masts swaying gently in the morning breeze. Not a fleet anymore. Not really. The proud Achaean navy had been scattered by years of war, sunk by storms, burned in rage. What remained were patched together vessels, sails sewn from tents and banners, timbers splintered and nailed back together with bronze and prayer. Yours creaked underfoot as you stepped aboard. You laid a palm on the rail, the wood warm under your skin, and whispered a quick offering to Poseidon, the only god you still half trusted. Odysseus stood at the prow, already awake. He had not slept the night before. His eyes were turned west to the horizon, where nothing yet stirred but the light of the rising sun. He was not a large man, not broad-shouldered or brash like Ajax had been, but there was a weight in his gaze, a sharpness. He did not speak unless there was something worth saying. When he did speak, you listened. You remember the feeling of departure. The final rope was cut and the ship began to drift. Oars dipped slowly into the sea. The creak of wood and the slap of water became the only rhythm in your ears. There were no shouts, no cheers, just the quiet sounds of men too tired to pretend. One man wept softly. Another whispered a prayer to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. You only watched the shoreline shrink and felt something inside you shrink with it. Behind you, the ruins of Troy glimmered in the haze, a city you had come to hate and now couldn't stop looking at. Ahead of you, nothing but sea. The first days passed in a hush. The sea was calm, a deep blue that reflected the sky so perfectly it sometimes felt like you were sailing through the air itself. The sun was warm, but not cruel. Dolphins swam beside the hull. You spotted gulls overhead, their wings silent as they followed your course. The crew fell into a rhythm. Some slept for hours at a time. Others cleaned the deck, sharpened blades, braided their hair out of habit. You took your turn at the oars. The weight of it was familiar now, a kind of meditation. Push, pull, breathe. Odysseus did not row. He walked the deck in silence, sometimes pausing to stare into the distance as if expecting to see something rise from the water. A sign, a spirit, a trick of the gods. One night, you could not sleep. You lay on your back beneath the open sky. The stars were bright, undisturbed. There was no moon, only the constellations you had memorized as a boy. Orion with his bow, Cassiopeia in her throne, the bear always pointing north. You heard footsteps beside you. Odysseus sat down, not looking at you. He held a small cloth in his hands, rubbing it between his fingers. After a long silence, he said, "I saw her in a dream last night." You didn't need to ask who. Penelope, the queen, his wife. She was weaving, just as she used to. Same room, same chair. But she looked older. He closed his eyes. I don't know if it was a memory or a message. You said nothing. There was nothing to say. The wind brushed gently across your skin. The stars seemed to pulse with breath. I think the gods are still watching us, he said softly. You didn't ask if he meant that as a comfort or a warning. On the fourth day, a gull landed on the deck. It limped, one wing bent unnaturally, dragging behind it. A younger sailor reached to help, and Odysseus stopped him. Wait. He knelt, looked the bird in the eye, then stood. No omen, just a broken wing. He walked away. You wondered what else he had learned to see after 10 years of war. How many signs, how many silences he could read without needing a voice. That night, you dreamed of Ithaca again. But it wasn't the island you remembered. In your dream, it was vast and forested, filled with strange birds and waterfalls. Penelope stood at the edge of a cliff, wearing a crown of laurel and smiling. When you reached for her, she vanished. You woke to the sound of waves and the dull ache in your chest that had become familiar. One morning, a fog rolled in, thick as wool, curling around the ship like fingers. The sea fell silent, muffled by the mist. You rowed by instinct, by rhythm. The lookout at the bow could barely see a few feet ahead. No one spoke, not even Odysseus. Hours passed like this. The world reduced to wood and water and whiteness. You felt unmoored. Not lost, exactly, but not entirely real either. And then a sound, low, melodic, like singing. It was far away, soft, but unmistakable. You turned to Odysseus. His jaw was tight. Not yet, he muttered. Not them, not here. The singing faded. Later, the mist lifted. The sea was unchanged. But you weren't. The days blurred. Sometimes you stopped at islands, small ones, unnamed. You filled your jars with fresh water, gathered figs, dates, honeycomb. You met no people, just the occasional shrine, a broken statue, an altar buried in vines. One island had a tree that grew silver fruit. One bite, and your mouth went numb. You spit it out. Odysseus chuckled. Not all gifts are worth tasting. The wind turned sour on the seventh day. Not a storm, not yet. But something in the air shifted. The waves grew taller, the sky darker. Odysseus gathered the crew and spoke plainly. There will be trials ahead, he said. We have angered gods. We have angered fate. But we have not surrendered. He looked at each of you in turn. If you stay with me, you may not return home. But if we are clever, if we are patient, the gods may let us pass. You nodded, not because you believed him, but because what else was there? That night, you saw the war again in your dreams, but differently. You stood at the gates of Troy, but they weren't burning. They were made of ivory and gold, gleaming in the sun. Paris stood beside you, young and beautiful, holding an apple. Behind him, Helen wept. You turned to Odysseus. He said nothing. He only pointed to the sea. You woke just before dawn. The ship was still, the world quiet, a moment of peace. You held on to it, tightly. And so it went, each day a little farther west. Each night the stars wheeled overhead. Some men began carving charms from driftwood. Others painted eyes on the side of the hull, warding off spirits. You began humming to yourself, the same tune each time you rowed. A lullaby your mother used to sing when storms came over Ithaca's hills. You couldn't remember all the words, but the melody stayed with you, like the sea, like the longing. You watched Odysseus often. He was not invincible. You saw him stumble once when he thought no one was looking. You saw him trace his fingers over a piece of fabric that had belonged to Penelope. He kept it in a small leather pouch tied to his belt. He missed her, just as you missed your own family, whoever might still be waiting. He was not perfect, but he kept moving forward, and in that way, he kept all of you moving too. One night, you found yourself at the stern, watching the wake unfurl behind the ship, a trail of light on dark water. A small voice inside you asked, "What if we never return?" But another voice answered, softer still, "What if this is the return?" The sea rocked the ship gently. You closed your eyes and let the waves carry you onward. It began with stillness, no wind, no tide. The sea lay quiet beneath a sky so pale it seemed barely awake. Your ship drifted gently, the oars pulled in, the sails limp. The water was glass, not a ripple, not a breath, as if even the gods had paused to listen. That morning, the horizon shimmered with something new. An island, low and golden, just barely rising above the sea. No cliffs, no jagged rocks or watchful peaks. Just a gentle slope and a soft mist curling around its edges, as though the land itself had only just yawned into being. You were the first to see it. You blinked once, twice, unsure at first if it was real. Odysseus joined you at the bow. He stared in silence for a long time, then nodded once. "We go ashore," he said quietly, "but with caution. Always with caution now." The sea had already taught you that. The sand was warm beneath your feet. Not hot, not coarse, but soft like crushed petals. Your sandals sank slightly with every step. The breeze, if it could be called that, carried no salt or sting, just a faint scent of honey, and something else, something hard to name, like the smell of a dream long forgotten. No birds called overhead, no insects hummed, no footsteps but your own. The island was quiet, but not dead. It was content. You climbed a small hill and looked down into a hollow where trees with wide silver-green leaves leaned toward one another. Their branches moved not with wind, but as if sighing in sleep. Beneath them, golden fruits hung in loose clusters, like figs, but brighter. Pale yellow, almost translucent, glowing faintly in the shaded grove. A group of figures waited among the trees. Not soldiers, not monsters. People, calm, slow-moving, draped in robes that shimmered like silk. They sat or reclined in the grass, eating the golden fruit in silence. One reached up and offered you one with an open palm. You were hungry, you took it, and everything began to slow. The first bite was warm, not sweet, not exactly, but rich, like something you'd craved your entire life without realizing it. It didn't fill your stomach. It filled something else. Your shoulders relaxed. Your legs, tired from days at sea, seemed to soften at the joints. You sat down without meaning to, your body melting into the grass as if it had always belonged there. You took another bite, and then you forgot what came before. The ship, the war, the long return. All of it blurred, thinned, and slipped away like mist. You remembered your name, vaguely. You remembered the sea, but not how long you'd been sailing. You remembered a woman's voice once, calling from far away. But the sound faded before you could grasp it. You looked around. The others were there too, your crewmates. Some you recognized, others less so. Their eyes were half-lidded, their mouths full of golden fruit. One man, barely out of boyhood, laughed softly and laid back in the grass, with a smile so peaceful you couldn't help but mirror it. What harm was there in resting? You didn't even realize how long it had been since you moved. Time lost its edges. Somewhere in the trees, music played. You never saw the instrument, never saw the player, but the sound drifted like smoke, slow, drifting, just one note after another. You listened, and in that moment you felt safe. No more rowing, no more gods, no more fear. You couldn't quite remember what you had feared anyway. Was there something waiting for you beyond the sea? You weren't sure. It didn't matter, not here. You don't know how long passed. Hours, days. But at some point, you became aware of someone standing nearby. A shadow fell across you. You looked up and saw Odysseus. He didn't speak, just looked down at you with tired eyes. There was no anger in his face, no scolding, just a quiet sadness. You held out the fruit to him. He shook his head. "You've forgotten," he said softly. You blinked. The fruit slipped from your hand. "You've forgotten where we're going." He crouched beside you. His hand rested gently on your shoulder. It felt real, solid, heavy. "Ithaca," he said. The word stirred something inside you. A stone dropped into still water. He leaned closer. Your mother's voice, the sound of cicadas in summer, the way the wind smells when it carries dust from the mountains. More words, more ripples. "You told me once," he said, "that when you were a boy, you climbed a fig tree so tall, your father had to bribe you with honey to come down. You laughed. You didn't mean to. You remembered just a sliver, a breath. Enough. He helped you to your feet. Behind him, others were waking, blinking, wavering. A few did not rise. You saw the boy who had laughed, still lying peacefully in the grass. His eyes closed, a soft smile on his lips. He would not leave. Odysseus did not force him. He only looked at you again and said, "Come." You walked back down the hill. Slowly. The sand was harder now. The sweetness in the air had thinned. As you stepped into the water to wade toward the ship, a great weight pressed down on you, not on your body, but on your memory. You realized how much you had lost in that brief forgetting. Names, faces, songs, promises. You couldn't remember what day it was, or what month, or how long you had wandered through golden groves eating fruit that made the world feel safe. But you remembered Ithaca. That was enough. Back on the ship, the sails were raised. The oars creaked to life. The water lapped gently at the hull. No one spoke for a long time. You sat quietly, watching the island fade behind you. No angry spirits chased you. No curses fell from the sky. The island simply let you go, as if it had never needed you to stay, as if it knew that those who forget willingly are no threat. That night, sleep did not come easily, not because of fear, but because a part of you longed for that golden quiet. You lay on your side, eyes open, staring at the curve of the moon above. You thought of the boy who stayed, of his smile. You wondered if he would remember anything at all, or if the dream would swallow him completely. You wondered what was kinder, to forget or to carry the weight of return. You wondered if someday, when the sea had given you back to the land and the olive trees grew around your old bones, you'd long for forgetting again. Odysseus stood at the helm. His eyes scanned the horizon. His back was straight, his hands steady. But you saw it now, the effort it took to stay awake, to remember. You understood him better than you ever had. He remembered everything, even the parts that begged to be lost. That was his gift, and his curse. The wind picked up again. The ship began to move faster. The island was long gone. Ahead, another one waited. And you, still weary, still aching, knew that not all islands offered sleep. Some held monsters, some gods. But for now, the waves were soft, and the stars above did not judge. You smelled the island before you saw it, not the sweet scent of flowers or the salty breeze that usually drifted across your ship. No, this was thicker, damp, earthy, a strange mix of sheep and smoke, of milk gone sour and stone warmed by fire. The shoreline was jagged and grey. Sharp black rocks reached out from the sea like broken teeth. Waves crashed against them lazily, as though even the ocean approached this place with caution. Odysseus stood at the helm again, his eyes narrowed. "There are people here," he said quietly. "Not cities, not soldiers, but someone, something." You rowed ashore in silence. Only a few of you went, the strongest, the most trusted. Odysseus chose you. You weren't sure whether to feel honored or afraid. The land sloped upward into a cliffside dotted with scrub and scattered stones. You walked in single file, boots crunching softly against gravel and ash. At the top of the rise, a cave opened before you, wide and dark, the kind of opening that looked less like a home and more like a mouth. Odysseus raised a hand. The group halted. He stepped forward, and you followed. The cave swallowed you. Inside, it was cool, almost cold. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of livestock and damp wool. Your eyes adjusted slowly, shapes forming out of shadow. Pens of sheep, large baskets of cheese, clay jars stacked against the walls. There were no torches, no decorations, just function, just food. But no people. Not yet. Still, you felt watched, as though the stone itself had eyes. Odysseus signaled to spread out. A few men tasted the cheese. Others filled their water skins. One leaned against the wall to rest. You remained near the entrance, alert. And then the sound. Heavy, dull, rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. Something, no, someone was coming. The shape that filled the mouth of the cave was impossibly large. A man, but not a man. Hair like brambles, limbs like tree trunks. A single eye, wide and unblinking, set in the middle of his forehead. The Cyclops. You'd heard stories. Drunk men at festivals muttering about giants on lonely islands. Shepherds who herded rocks as well as sheep. Beasts that lived without laws, without gods. But stories never made them feel real. This one was very real. He spoke. Not words you understood at first, more like a rumble, a sound pulled from the throat of the earth. Odysseus stepped forward and spoke calmly. He said you were travelers, survivors of war, seeking shelter, food, hospitality, the sacred rights of all mortals, even strangers. The Cyclops tilted his head, then laughed. It wasn't cruel, just amused, deep and slow, like thunder rolling across hills. He blocked the cave entrance with a boulder, too large for 10 men to move, and then, with shocking swiftness, he reached out and crushed one of your men in his fist. You don't remember the sound. Not really. Your mind would not let you. You remember the blood, the way it steamed in the cool air, the way no one screamed, not even the man himself. And you remember your own stillness, how you didn't move, couldn't. Odysseus whispered something, a plan, maybe, or a prayer, but no gods came. Night fell inside the cave. The Cyclops settled near the fire he built from driftwood and bones. The sheep returned, bleating softly, as if this were any other evening. You and the others huddled near the far wall. The boulder still sealed the entrance. Odysseus did not sleep, nor did you. You counted your breaths, one by one. You thought of home, of trees, of rivers, anything but this. And still, no gods came. When morning came, the Cyclops rose and left again, taking his flock and rolling the stone aside just long enough to vanish into the light. Then, silence. Odysseus turned to you. His face was calm, too calm. I have a plan, he said, but it must be done tonight. You nodded. What else could you do? There was no sailing away from this. All day, you worked quietly. You helped Odysseus sharpen a long wooden stake, thick as your arm, carved from a branch you found buried under discarded logs. You watched him heat the point in the fire until it glowed red, then blackened. You took turns pressing your ear to the stone wall, listening for signs of return. Your stomach ached, not from hunger, but from knowing what would come. And then the sound returned. Thud. The Cyclops was back. He entered humming to himself, a slow, ugly tune. He dropped his flock into their pens, then rolled the stone shut again. He ate another man. This time, you watched every second. You had to. There could be no forgetting if the plan was to work. Odysseus approached him with a jar of wine. Dark, strong, saved for offerings. The Cyclops sniffed it, tasted, grinned. He drank deeply and asked Odysseus for his name. Odysseus smiled, calm, clever, and said, "My name is Nobody." The Cyclops laughed again. Then, with a sigh, he fell. Sleep came quickly for the giant. His snores shook dust from the walls. The fire burned low. Odysseus gave the signal. You helped him lift the stake, still warm from the coals, and together, silently, with all the strength your tired arms could give, you drove it into his eye. The sound he made was not human. It filled the cave, echoed back and forth. A storm trapped in stone. The Cyclops thrashed, screamed. Blood poured from his face, hot and thick, flooding the floor. He called to his brothers, other giants who lived beyond the hills, crying out that nobody is hurting me, nobody is killing me. And so they did not come. He clawed at the stone door, blind now, stumbling. But he did not open it. He guarded it, waited, felt. You had to escape at dawn. There was no other way. The plan was mad, but it was all you had. You tied yourself to the underside of a sheep. The others did the same. When the Cyclops let them out to graze, running his hand over their woolly backs, he did not feel you beneath them. You held your breath. You prayed. You were the last to pass. His hand brushed your shoulder, but did not stop. You crawled from beneath the sheep once you reached open air, and you ran. Back on the ship, you barely spoke. Some wept. Others stared at the waves without blinking. Odysseus stood at the stern, arms crossed. And then he shouted. He told the Cyclops his name, told him who had blinded him, who had tricked him. You begged him to stop, but the name was already in the wind, already on the sea, already reaching the ears of Poseidon. The island fell behind you. The cave vanished into distance. The sea was no calmer than before, but it felt heavier, as though it carried something new now, something watching. That night, no one sang. You slept with your eyes open. The stars above were bright, but offered no comfort. You tried to tell yourself it was over, that you were safe now. But deep down, you knew the real journey had just begun, and the gods had begun to listen. You had begun to lose track of time. Days on the sea passed like mist, formless, quiet. The sun rose, the oars dipped, and the waves spoke their endless language beneath the hull. But even the sea grew weary, it seemed. That morning, the winds slowed. The sails sagged. The sky turned pale and milk-colored. A warm stillness settled over the water. Not oppressive, not threatening, just full, as if something waited, unseen. Ahead, an island rose from the sea, green and lush, unlike the grey coasts and jagged cliffs you'd grown used to. It looked alive. The trees leaned together as if whispering. The leaves moved even without wind. Light shimmered oddly between the trunks, like candlelight flickering underwater. Odysseus called for anchor. The crew stirred, restless, uncertain. You stepped into the small landing craft, the oarsman quiet, eyes on the shoreline. The beach was soft beneath your feet, sand scattered with pink shells and smooth stones. Tiny crabs skittered past your boots. Birds you didn't recognize called out in low, flute-like tones. There were paths in the grass, faint but unmistakable, as if someone walked there often. A team of men, led by Eurylochus, volunteered to scout inland. You stayed with the ship. At first, you watched them disappear into the woods, voices low, blades drawn just in case. Hours passed. The sun slid across the sky like a lazy hand. You waited. You watched the trees. Nothing moved. Then, one man returned, alone. Eurylochus stumbled from the path like a man waking from a nightmare. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow. He fell to his knees in the sand, muttering nonsense. Odysseus knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. "What happened?" he asked. Eurylochus shook his head. She welcomed us, a woman, alone, in a house made of cedar and gold. She gave us food, wine. It was safe." He looked up. "And then they changed." "Changed?" "Pigs, lions, creatures." She touched them, spoke softly, and they changed. His voice cracked. "I ran." Odysseus stood. He buckled his sword, and he walked into the forest alone. You couldn't stay behind. You followed, slowly, silently, a shadow on the path behind your king. The woods thickened, leaves whispered your name. Ferns brushed your legs like curious hands. The air was heavy with herbs and heat. Then a clearing, and in it, her home. It was beautiful. The walls were made of carved wood and polished stone. Ivy crawled up its sides like green lace. The scent of flowers drifted from open windows, and from within, music, software slow, a voice humming in a language older than gods. She stood at the doorway. Circe. She was not what you expected. No fangs, no flames, no cackling curses. She looked like a woman who had grown beyond time, not young, not old. Her hair fell in loose waves, darker than midnight. Her eyes were unreadable, deep and still. She smiled when she saw Odysseus, and her smile did not seem cruel. She welcomed him in. You stayed hidden behind the trees. You waited, heart beating softly in your chest. Minutes passed, then more. You stepped closer. There were animals in the yard. A lion, its golden mane dappled with sunlight, dozing beside a bowl of water. A wolf curled like a hound at the edge of the porch. None of them looked wild. None of them looked unhappy. You walked slowly toward the door. Inside, the house glowed with warm light. Candles flickered on the walls. Vines hung from the rafters. A fire crackled quietly in the hearth, above which herbs dried in fragrant bundles. Circe and Odysseus sat at a table, speaking softly. When she saw you, she gestured to a seat. "Come in," she said. "You've nothing to fear here." And strangely, you believed her. She offered you a drink, not wine, not mead, something floral, faintly sweet, faintly bitter. You sipped it, and the world softened. The days blurred. You stayed, all of you. The lost crew were returned to their human forms, confused but whole. She apologized, not with guilt, but with honesty. "I do not always know what people bring with them," she said. "Sometimes it's safer if they don't speak." You slept in beds carved from olive wood, ate meals flavored with rosemary, mint, and rose water. Circe taught you the names of stars, the meaning of wind. You learned how to listen to plants, to tell when they wanted to be used and when they preferred silence. She sang sometimes, her voice low and unhurried. She never asked where you had come from. She never asked when you were leaving. You dreamed vividly on the island, of strange places, of your childhood, of lives that weren't yours. One night, you dreamed you were a tree, tall, still, leaves brushing the sky. Birds nested in your arms. The world passed, and you remained. Another night, you dreamed you were Circe, alone in a house that smelled of cedar, speaking to lions as though they were old friends. You woke each time with the feeling that the dreams were true, not metaphor, memory. You began to forget the war, the sea, even Ithaca felt faded, distant, like a place from a story someone once told you by firelight. Here, there were no gods demanding obedience, no curses to outrun, only quiet, only peace, only her. But Odysseus remembered, always. He moved through the days like a man with a string tied to the horizon. Even in laughter, he did not let go. You found him once, standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the woods. "I could stay," he said. "You waited. But I won't." Circe did not stop him. She walked with him to the edge of the trees. She gave him a satchel of herbs, a silver dagger, a kiss on the cheek. She whispered something you couldn't hear. He nodded, and then she turned away. She never looked back. You returned to the ship in silence. It felt foreign now, smaller, harder. The sea did not welcome you. It waited, quiet and cold. As you pulled away, the island remained still. No storm followed you, no curse, no anger. Only that golden house fading into the trees. That night, the stars were brighter than before. Odysseus stood at the helm. You asked him what she had said. He waited a long time, then answered, "She told me to visit the dead." And with that, the sails turned. You felt it before you heard it. A shift in the air, a hush like the world itself was holding its breath. The sky was bright but cloudless. The sea was smooth as glass, not blue but silver, a mirror stretched across the world. The sails hung still, even the wind had gone quiet. You looked to Odysseus. He was already preparing. He gave each of you a piece of wax, soft and golden, warmed between the palms until it bent like dough. He spoke gently, as though explaining something sacred. "You'll put this in your ears," he said, "and you'll keep it there until we've passed." "And you?" you asked. He met your gaze. "I will listen." He had already ordered the mast cleared, ropes coiled neatly at the base. You helped him tie the first knot yourself, looped tightly, securely, across his chest, around his waist, down to his ankles. Anchored, bound. He looked down at the sea, then at you. "Whatever I say, whatever I beg, do not untie me." You nodded, and the ship drifted forward. You pressed the wax into your ears, and the world fell silent. No creak of wood, no rustle of sail, no breath of wind or call of gull, only stillness. You looked at the sea, waiting for the music, but you would not hear it. Only Odysseus would. You watched him closely, not as a king, not as a myth, but as a man in the grip of something greater than himself. The water grew brighter, not lighter, brighter, like something glowed just beneath the surface. Faint swirls of gold and pale green shimmered below the hull, rising like heat from a summer road. Then Odysseus's head snapped up. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, not in pain, in awe. He saw them. You could only guess. Perhaps the sirens looked like women or birds, or something in between. The stories never agreed, but Odysseus saw them, and his entire body changed. He strained against the ropes, not wildly, but desperately, like a man trying to reach the surface of deep water, like he had forgotten he was tied, forgotten he was a man at all. He screamed, but you couldn't hear the words. His mouth moved with fevered urgency. His eyes were wet. He shook the mast with his whole weight, veins straining, muscles pulling until the ropes bit into his skin. But you held fast. You did not move. The ship drifted on. No wind, no oars, just a slow, inevitable slide across the sea. You looked ahead, saw rocks jutting from the water like ancient teeth. Carvings lined them, spirals, sigils, names in languages older than speech. Bones lay sun-bleached in the shallows. Not many, just enough. You looked back to Odysseus. Tears ran down his cheeks. His lips mouthed something like, "Please." Still, you did not move. Then, slowly, his body softened. He sagged against the mast, breath heaving. The ropes were stained where his wrists had bled, but he was no longer fighting, just listening, eyes wide, unfocused, as if the music had moved beyond sound and into something deeper. You wondered, in that moment, what he heard. Maybe the sirens didn't sing of glory or love. Maybe they sang of home. Maybe they knew your secret memories, the scent of your mother's bread, the shade beneath your favorite fig tree, the sound of your name whispered by someone you had once loved and lost. Maybe they promised rest, not death, not pain, just stillness. A place where you no longer had to move forward, a place where the journey ended. And for a moment, you envied him, not for hearing the song, but for surviving it. Eventually, the sea changed. The brightness dulled. The shimmer faded. Wind returned, light and cool, and the sails caught it gently. Odysseus lowered his head. His eyes were empty, but alive. You moved to untie him. He did not speak for a long time. You washed the blood from his wrists, bound them with clean cloth. You offered him water, which he did not drink. He stared at the sea. "I would have jumped," he said at last, voice raw. You said nothing. "There was nothing cruel in it," he added quietly. "No threat. Only welcome." He looked at you, and you saw something new in his face. Not fear, not regret, but longing. The other men removed the wax from their ears. One by one, they rejoined the world of sound. Laughter returned, soft and tentative. Someone began to hum a song you half recognized, but it sounded thin compared to the silence you'd just passed through. You sat beside the mast. The ropes lay coiled at your feet. You touched them, still warm, and wondered if some part of the song had seeped into the knots themselves. That night, the stars returned. You lay on your back, staring up into them, wondering how many sailors had passed this way, how many had heard the sirens and listened too long. You wondered what they saw in their final moments, if they fell not in fear, but in peace, if, even in death, they felt loved. Odysseus did not sleep. He sat at the stern, unmoving. You watched him until your own eyes closed. And when you dreamed of waves shaped like voices, of names whispered in the tide, of a place that wasn't land or sea, but something in between. And for a while, you drifted there. Far from the sea, under a quiet sky, a woman waited. She sat by an open window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a thread of wool tangled in her sleeve. The hills of Ithaca stretched out before her, dry and gold, dotted with olive trees, too silent for the time of year. The wind was warm, but it carried no scent of rain, only dust, only waiting. Her name was Penelope, but most simply called her the Queen. Each morning she woke before the sun. The first thing she did was listen, not to servants or birds, but to the sea. Though her home was far inland, she believed, somehow she could still hear it, a distant hush just beyond the hills. She had been listening for years. Sometimes she imagined she heard oars, a sail snapping in the wind, footsteps on stone. But each time it was only the wind in the fig trees. And so she rose and began again. She spent her days at the loom, threading, weaving, unweaving. Her fingers moved with practiced grace, though her thoughts wandered freely. Each pass of the shuttle was a heartbeat, each knot a whisper, each row of fabric a map of her silence. She had promised the suitors she would choose among them once the weaving was done, a burial shroud for Odysseus's father. But at night, in secret, she undid the day's work. Row by row, time unraveled under her hands. The suitors were always there, 30 of them, 40, more. They drank her wine, laughed too loudly, left their sandals in the hall like kings. They called her wise Penelope to her face and whispered other names behind her back. They said no man would return from such a war. They said she was beautiful. They said she was stalling. They were right. She was stalling, for time, for hope, for a dream that might not come true. She wrote letters she never sent, folded them carefully, tucked them into the corners of drawers. Notes to a man who might already be dead, or worse, changed. She didn't imagine him as he was. She imagined him older, not a warrior, not a hero, just a man, with lines on his face, sand in his beard, a quiet in his eyes. Would she recognize him? Would he recognize her? Sometimes she stood in the doorway at dusk, just as the light turned amber, and imagined the shape of a ship pulling into the bay. She pictured a figure, tall, tired, stepping off the dock. He would not run to her. She would not run to him. They would meet slowly, cautiously, like two ghosts finally waking from a long dream. No words, just the knowing. Her son had grown tall in his father's absence. Telemachus. He bore Odysseus's eyes, sharp and distant, and asked questions that carried too much weight for a boy. He had sailed once, seeking answers. When he returned, he said nothing, but his hands trembled when he hugged her. She asked no questions. Some things were better left unsaid. At night, Penelope sat by the hearth and worked the loom by lamplight. The shadows danced on the stone floor. She hummed to herself, songs her mother had taught her, songs from before she was a queen, before Ithaca, before the war. Sometimes she hummed lullabies, though there was no child to sing to. Sometimes she hummed prayers, not to the gods, to the sea, to the silence, to whatever part of Odysseus might still be listening. One night she dreamed of him, but not as he had been. He was older, quiet. He walked beside her in the orchard, his hand grazing the low branches. They didn't speak, but in the dream she knew it was him. She woke with tears in her eyes and the taste of pomegranates on her tongue. Years passed, seasons changed. The loom was never finished, not because she was slow, because she refused to be done. She wove love into the threads. She wove waiting. She wove the shape of a man she wasn't sure still existed. She wove the shape of herself, not as she had been, but as she was now, strong, alone, enduring. Then, one evening, a storm passed over the hills, not a violent one, not full of thunder or divine rage, just a steady rain falling in clean sheets across the land. It soaked the trees, filled the wells, carried the scent of sea salt far inland. Penelope stood at the window, and something stirred, not in the sky, in her bones, a knowing. She turned to her loom. She tied off the thread. For the first time in 20 years, she did not pick it apart. She let it hold. She let it be done. The suitors noticed. They whispered. They pressed. But Penelope simply smiled and waited. You saw the shoreline before you believed it. A blur at first, just another hazy edge of land on the horizon. Your heart did not leap. Your pulse did not quicken. You had seen too many false hopes, too many islands not meant for you. But as the sun rose higher, the shape became familiar. The cliffs, the curve of the bay, the slope of the hills beyond. Ithaca. You said nothing at first. Neither did Odysseus. He stood at the prow, hands resting gently on the wood, his eyes fixed forward, not with joy, but with something deeper. Recognition. The ship slid silently into the cove. No fanfare, no banners, no welcoming trumpets, just the hush of water against the hull. You stepped ashore barefoot, the sand cooler than you remembered, the earth heavier. Your knees ached, your boots were worn thin, your beard had gone silver, but the trees still stood, the olives still swayed in the wind, and the air smelled right. Odysseus did not go straight to the palace. He walked the coastline first. You followed at a distance, giving him space. He touched stones he'd once played on as a boy. He watched fishermen mend their nets. He closed his eyes and let the wind wrap around him. It had been 20 years. Time had grown roots here. But some things remained. When he reached the gates of his home, he did not enter. He disguised himself, not with magic, with humility, an old cloak, a walking stick, dust on his face, silence in his eyes. He walked among the suitors, listened to their laughter, watched Penelope from afar. And when the moment came, he revealed himself, not with fire or thunder, but with a scar, the mark from a childhood hunt, a story no stranger could know. She saw it, she touched it, and she knew. There were tears, yes, but no drama, just the long, slow exhale of two people who had waited beyond reason. They sat together in silence, hands clasped, not speaking, because the silence said everything. You left the palace soon after. There was no place for you in stories now. Your name would not be remembered, but that was never why you came. You returned to your olive grove, the one your grandfather had planted. You repaired your roof, sharpened your old tools, sat under the same fig tree where you'd once kissed someone you'd nearly forgotten. And at night, you slept, truly slept, without waves beneath you, without gods overhead, without the ache of forward motion. Odysseus visited you once. He brought a flask of wine and an old map. You sat beneath the tree and spoke quietly. not of monsters or trials, but of soil and weather and what it meant to grow old. He asked if you missed the sea. You said no, not because it hadn't mattered, but because it had already given you everything you needed. That night, you dreamed of the ship, not as it was, battered and patched and groaning with age, but whole, the sails full, the stars bright. You stood at the helm once more, young again, the wind in your hair, the salt on your skin. But you weren't going anywhere. The ship drifted in a circle, home to home to home. You closed your eyes and let it carry you. And now, dear traveller, your own journey through these stories draws to a close. You've walked beside kings and tricksters, listened to songs not meant for mortal ears, wandered through forests and forgotten shores. You've waited, remembered, forgotten, returned, and here you are, still breathing, still dreaming, still home. So let this final silence wrap around you like a blanket. Let your thoughts float like ships on still water. You don't need to hold the details. The myths remember themselves. They'll wait for you. They always do. Sleep well, sailor. You've made it back, and somewhere in a house that smells of cedar and olive wood, someone is weaving your story.